Senator Mike Pence thought he could intimidate the new congressman with his calm, composed demeanor and deep political experience. The 64-year-old Indiana Republican had dominated countless debates with his calm, authoritative presence and mastery of political strategies. But when he tried to corner 43-year-old Jonathan Roumie in the House Judiciary Committee, he had no idea what was coming. What happened in the next 60 seconds left Pence completely speechless and may have just launched Roumie into the national spotlight forever. The California Democrat didn't just defend himself, he delivered a comeback so sharp, so perfectly timed, that even Republicans in the room had to respect the hit. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these epic political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of what Jonathan Roumie just did to Mike Pence. The committee room fell dead silent. Pence, who had been leaning back in his chair with that confident smirk, suddenly sat up straight. His face went from amused to shocked in seconds. Even Chairman Jim Jordan, who never loses control of his hearings, looked stunned by what just happened. This wasn't just a political exchange. This was a generational clash that showed the old guard exactly what the new generation of leaders brings to the table. And Mike Pence just learned that lesson the hard way. To understand why this moment was so explosive, you need to know who these two powerhouses really are and why this confrontation was always inevitable. Mike Pence isn't your typical politician. Sure, he talks with a calm, calculated tone and loves his conservative principles, but don't let that fool you. This man served as the governor of Indiana and vice president of the United States, having spent decades in public service. Pence built his reputation by appealing to traditional American values, expertly navigating the intricacies of politics with unwavering principles. He knows how to work a room with his polite, old-school charm. His colleagues respect his experience, even when they disagree with his politics. He's the embodiment of the old guard, smart and reserved, but that makes him incredibly effective at making opponents look foolish. But Jonathan Roumie isn't like most people. The 43-year-old California Democrat came to Congress in 2023 with a passion for change and a fire that Washington hadn't seen in years. He's not just another politician. Roumie is an actor, known for his roles that challenge societal norms, and as a public advocate, he's spent years fighting for justice, equality, and human rights. Roumie built his career by pushing boundaries, inspiring millions, and using his platform to create meaningful change. When he won his seat, Roumie made it clear that he wasn't here to play nice. He came to Congress to make an impact, to speak out against systemic injustices, and to challenge a system that had long been broken. What made this confrontation so inevitable was the clash of everything these two represent. Pence embodies the old-school approach, controlled, diplomatic, and calculated, using his experience and charm to maintain control. Roumie represents the new wave, direct, passionate, unafraid to call out hypocrisy, even when it's uncomfortable. The House Judiciary Committee had been tense all morning. They were discussing voting rights legislation, a topic that hit close to home for Roumie, given his background as an advocate for marginalized communities. Pence had been making his usual points about state rights and federal overreach, using his polished rhetoric to make the Democratic arguments seem unreasonable. But something was different this time. You could feel the tension building as Pence kept pushing, kept using that condescending tone that suggested he knew better than everyone else in the room. Roumie had been taking notes, waiting for his moment, and those who knew him could see the fire building in his eyes. The stakes weren't just about this one hearing. This was about respect, about who gets to control the narrative, and about whether the new generation of leaders would let themselves be talked down to by the old guard. Both Pence and Roumie knew that millions would be watching the clips later, and both knew this moment could define how they're seen nationally. Pence had just finished a long speech about how federal voting rights legislation was unnecessary and how states could handle these issues themselves. He was in his element, talking about constitutional principles and legal precedents, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice. Then he made the mistake that would cost him everything. Instead of moving on to the next topic, Pence decided to go after Roumie personally. Maybe he thought he'd be an easy target, a first-term congressman who wouldn't dare challenge a seasoned politician. Maybe he was used to intimidating people with his credentials and experience. Whatever he was thinking, Pence was about to learn that Jonathan Roumie doesn't intimidate easily. And the entire room was about to witness what happens when someone with Pence's ego meets someone with Roumie's fire. The tension in the House Judiciary Committee room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Chairman Jim Jordan was trying to keep the hearing on track, but you could feel something building. Senator Pence had been invited to testify as an expert witness on constitutional law, and he was clearly enjoying being the smartest person in the room. But Jonathan Roumie wasn't going to let him get away with it. Senator Mike Pence leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and delivered what he thought would be a knockout punch. His voice carried that slow, deliberate cadence that had intimidated countless witnesses before. "Mr. Roumie," he began, using that tone teachers use when they're about to correct a student, "I appreciate your passion. I really do. But passion without understanding is just noise. Now, I've been studying constitutional law since before you were born, and I can tell you that what you're proposing here today shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how our federal system works." The Republican side of the committee started nodding. A few staffers in the back began taking notes, sensing this might be heading toward a viral moment. Pence was doing what he did best, using his age, experience, and credentials to establish dominance. "You see," Pence continued, now fully in professor mode, "when you've been around as long as I have, when you've actually practiced law at the level I have, you understand that these issues aren't as simple as you young folks like to make them seem." The condescension was unmistakable. Even some Republicans looked uncomfortable with Pence's tone. Democratic committee members exchanged glances, clearly frustrated, but unsure how to respond without seeming disrespectful to a senior senator. Roumie sat perfectly still, his pen poised over his notepad, but if you watch closely, you could see his jaw tightening. His staff later said they knew that look. It was the same expression he got when underestimating opponents in courtrooms. Pence wasn't done. "Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful, Mr. Roumie, but when you've graduated from law school, when you've spent decades in public service, and when you've served as Vice President of the United States, maybe you'll understand why your proposal here is so problematic." That's when Pence made his fatal error. Instead of stopping with the condescension, he decided to go personal. "I mean, let's be honest here," Pence said, leaning back in his chair with that smirk that had made him famous. "You're a freshman congressman from California who spent his time in Hollywood making movies and acting. That's admirable, it really is. But it's not exactly the same as understanding how constitutional law works at the federal level." The room went dead quiet. Even the usual shuffling of papers stopped. Pence had just crossed a line that experienced politicians know you never cross. He had dismissed not just Roumie's position, but his entire career and qualifications. What Pence didn't realize was that he had just made the worst possible argument to the worst possible person. Jonathan Roumie had spent years fighting against exactly this kind of dismissive attitude. He had dealt with people who thought they could intimidate him with their titles and positions. But this wasn't a film set where he had to play a role. This was a congressional hearing where he was an equal member, and Pence had just made it personal. Roumie looked up from his notes for the first time since Pence started talking. The cameras caught the moment perfectly. His expression was calm, almost serene, but there was something in his eyes that should have warned Pence he was in trouble. "Senator Pence," he said quietly, his voice so controlled it was almost scary, "I appreciate you sharing your resume with us. That's very helpful context." Pence smiled, thinking he had won. He had no idea what was coming. "But since we're talking about qualifications and experience," Roumie continued, his voice still deadly calm, "let me make sure I understand your position correctly." He picked up a folder from his desk. A folder that everyone would later learn contained research his staff had prepared on Pence's own record. The Democratic side of the committee started paying closer attention. They could sense something was about to happen. "You're saying that my experience as an advocate for human rights and social justice doesn't qualify me to understand legislation on these issues. Is that correct?" Pence nodded, still confident. "Well, I'm saying there's a difference between advocacy in the public space and understanding constitutional principles at the federal level." "I see," Roumie said. "And you're saying this because you have extensive experience with social justice cases, among other things?" "Yes," Pence replied, trying to remain in control. That's when Roumie opened the folder. The camera zoomed in on his face, and for the first time since Pence started talking, Roumie smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media. Roumie had done exactly what any good attorney does in court. He had let his opponent dig his own grave with his own words. Pence had established himself as the expert, dismissed Roumie's qualifications, and claimed superior knowledge. Now Roumie was about to use all of that against him. The Republican side of the committee was starting to look nervous. They could sense the shift in energy, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what was happening. Chairman Jordan tried to interject and move the hearing along, but Roumie wasn't done. "Senator Pence," he said, his voice now carrying the authority he had learned in courtrooms across California. "Since you've established yourself as the expert on constitutional law and social justice issues, I'm sure you can help us understand something." Pence nodded, still not realizing he was walking into a trap. "Can you tell us about your record on social justice cases? Specifically, how many social justice cases you have actually worked on in federal court?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Pence's smile started to fade as he realized where this was heading, but it was too late. Roumie had already lit the fuse. The moment of truth had arrived. Senator Pence, who seconds earlier had been the picture of confidence, now looked like a man who suddenly realized he had walked into quicksand. The slight hesitation in his response told everyone in the room that Jonathan Roumie had just landed a perfect shot. Pence cleared his throat, buying time. "Well, my experience with social justice work is broader than just federal cases specifically." But Roumie wasn't about to let him off the hook. "I didn't ask about your broad experience, Senator. I asked specifically about social justice cases in federal court. How many of you actually argued?" The cameras captured every micro-expression on Pence's face. The confident smirk was completely gone, replaced by the look of someone who knew they were in serious trouble. Republican committee members started shifting in their seats. Even Chairman Jordan looked uncomfortable. Roumie didn't wait for Pence to keep struggling. He looked down at his folder and delivered the blow that would end Pence's dominance in this hearing forever. "Let me help you out, Senator, since you seem to be having trouble remembering your social justice experience. According to public records, you've worked on exactly 0 federal social justice cases. 0. The words hit like a sledgehammer. The Democratic side of the committee struggled to contain their reactions. A few staffers in the back couldn't hide their smiles. The Republican side looked like they wanted to disappear, but Roumie wasn't finished. He had learned long ago that when you have your opponent down, you don't let them get back up. "Now, since you brought up qualifications," Roumie said, pulling out another document from his folder, "you graduated from the University of Indiana in 1981. That's 44 years ago. In those 4 years, social justice law has evolved significantly. Court rulings have shifted, new challenges have emerged." He paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. "Meanwhile, I graduated in 2006 and have been actively practicing social justice law ever since. So while I respect your experience, Senator, when it comes to current social justice challenges, the law as it exists today, and what actually works in federal court, I think my experience might actually be more relevant than yours." The silence in the room was deafening. Pence, who had entered this exchange as the confident expert putting a young congressman in his place, now looked like a student who had been called out by the teacher. His famous calm had abandoned him. His folksy charm was nowhere to be found. He tried one last time to regain control. "Mr. Roumie, I think you're missing the broader constitutional principles." "No, Senator," Roumie said firmly. "I think you're missing the specific legal realities, and I think this committee deserves to hear from people who actually practice this law, not just people who talk about it." The Democratic side of the committee could barely contain themselves. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was caught on camera trying not to smile. Representative Jaime Raskin nodded approvingly. Even some of the Republican committee members looked impressed despite themselves. Chairman Jordan tried to move the hearing along, clearly uncomfortable with how thoroughly one of his star witnesses had been dismantled. But the damage was done. But Jonathan Roumie wasn't about to let him off the hook. He had spent too many years facing challenges in the public eye to let a witness wiggle away from a direct question. "I didn't ask about your broad experience, Senator. I asked specifically about social justice cases in federal court. How many of you argued?" The cameras captured every micro-expression on Pence's face. The confident smirk was completely gone, replaced by the look of someone who knew they were in serious trouble. Republican committee members started shifting in their seats. Even Chairman Jim Jordan looked uncomfortable. Roumie didn't wait for Pence to keep struggling. He looked down at his folder and delivered the blow that would end Pence's dominance in this hearing forever. "Let me help you out, Senator, since you seem to be having trouble remembering your social justice experience. According to public records, you have argued exactly 0 federal social justice cases. 0. The words hit like a sledgehammer. The Democratic side of the committee struggled to contain their reactions. A few staffers in the back couldn't hide their smiles. The Republican side looked like they wanted to disappear, but Roumie wasn't finished. He had learned long ago that when you have your opponent down, You don't let them get back up. Now, since you brought up qualifications, Roumie continued, pulling out a new piece of paper from his folder. Let me share mine. I have personally argued 14 federal social justice cases. 14. I've won jury verdicts protecting civil rights. I've argued before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I've spent the last 15 years of my career doing exactly the work we're discussing today. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Pence, who had spent the last 10 minutes lecturing about experience and credentials, had just been exposed as having zero practical experience in the exact area he was claiming expertise in. Meanwhile, Roumie, whom he had dismissed as a Hollywood actor, had extensive federal court experience. Pence tried to recover. Well, my constitutional law experience is much broader. Senator Pence, Roumie interrupted, his voice now carrying the full authority of someone who had just completely reversed the power dynamic in the room. With all due respect, you just spent 10 minutes telling this committee that my experience wasn't relevant because I was just an actor. But it turns out my small-time work includes more federal social justice experience than you have. The silence in the room was deafening. Pence, who had built his reputation on making other people look foolish with pointed questions, had just been outmaneuvered by someone he thought would be an easy target. But Roumie had saved the best for last. He pulled out another document from his folder that his staff had prepared specifically for this moment. And Senator, since you mentioned your impressive educational background, and it is impressive, I want to make sure we have all the facts on the table. Pence's face went pale. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew it wasn't going to be good. You graduated from the University of Indiana Law School in 1981. That's 44 years ago. In those 44 years, social justice law has evolved significantly. The Voting Rights Act has been amended, Supreme Court decisions have changed the landscape, and new challenges have emerged. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. Meanwhile, I graduated from law school in 2006 and have been actively practicing social justice law ever since. So while I respect your experience, Senator, when it comes to current social justice challenges, the law as it exists today, and what actually works in federal court, I think my experience might actually be more relevant than yours. The transformation was complete. Pence, who had entered this exchange as the confident expert putting a young congressman in his place, now looked like a student who had been called out by the teacher. His famous wit had abandoned him. His calm, folksy charm was nowhere to be found. He tried one last time to regain control. Mr. Roumie, I think you are missing the broader constitutional principles. No, Senator, Roumie said firmly. I think you are missing the specific legal realities, and I think this committee deserves to hear from people who actually practice this law, not just people who talk about it. The Democratic side of the committee could barely contain themselves. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was caught on camera trying not to smile. Representative Jaime Raskin nodded approvingly. Even some of the Republican committee members looked impressed despite themselves. Chairman Jordan tried to move the hearing along, clearly uncomfortable with how thoroughly one of his star witnesses had been dismantled, but the damage was done. In the span of 5 minutes, Jonathan Roumie had completely reversed the power dynamic and shown the entire room what happens when someone underestimates him. For the remaining 20 minutes of the hearing, Pence was a different person. Gone was the confident professor lecturing about constitutional law. Instead, he gave brief, careful answers and avoided making eye contact with Roumie. When Chairman Jordan asked if he had any closing thoughts, Pence simply said, "No, I think I've said enough." The cameras caught everything. Pence's complete transformation from confident expert to deflated witness. The moment when he realized he had been outplayed. The look on his face when Roumie delivered his final devastating point about whose experience was actually more relevant. Even before the hearing ended, clips of the exchange were going viral. The contrast between Pence's arrogant setup and Roumie's devastating response was perfect for social media. Hashtag Roumie destroys Pence started trending within an hour. The most shared clip was the moment when Roumie revealed Pence's 0 federal social justice cases compared to his 14. The second most shared was his final point about whose experience was actually more relevant. Both clips would eventually be viewed millions of times, but the real viral moment was the visual of Pence's complete transformation. Political observers noted that they had never seen the usually unflappable senator so thoroughly outmaneuvered. One Twitter user perfectly captured the moment. Mike Pence just learned why you don't bring an old political playbook to a courtroom fight. As the hearing concluded, the change in dynamics was obvious to everyone present. Pence packed up his materials quickly and left without his usual post-hearing media availability. Meanwhile, Roumie was surrounded by colleagues congratulating him on what many were already calling one of the best committee takedowns they had ever witnessed. One Democratic staffer was overheard saying, "I've never seen anyone do that to Pence before. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table." A Republican staffer admitted that was brutal. He completely destroyed Pence with his own arguments. The hearing had been about social justice legislation, but everyone left talking about Jonathan Roumie's masterclass in how to handle a bully who underestimates you. The immediate aftermath of Jonathan Roumie's demolition of Mike Pence was unlike anything Washington had seen in years. Within minutes of the hearing ending, the political world was buzzing with excitement, shock, and analysis of what had just happened. Before Pence had even left the Capitol building, #RoumieDestroys Pence was trending nationwide on Twitter. The clips were spreading faster than wildfire, with political observers, journalists, and ordinary Americans sharing and resharing the moment when the tables turned so dramatically. The most viral clip, which would eventually reach over 10 million views, was the perfect 15-second summary. Pence condescendingly lecturing about experience, followed immediately by Roumie's devastating, "You have argued exactly 0 federal social justice cases" response. The visual contrast was perfect. Pence's smug confidence melting into shocked silence. Political TikTok exploded with reaction videos. Young progressive activists were calling it the moment Gen X took down the old boys club. Legal professionals were analyzing Roumie's courtroom tactics. Even some conservative commentators had to admit it was a masterful political maneuver. One tweet that went massively viral came from a political science professor. "What we just witnessed was a perfect demonstration of the difference between credential privilege and actual expertise. Pence had the degrees, but Roumie had the experience." Within hours, every major news network was covering the story. CNN led with "Freshman Congressman Dismantles Veteran Senator in Viral Exchange." MSNBC called it "The Day Mike Pence Met His Match." Even Fox News, despite their usual Republican lean, had to acknowledge what their own cameras had captured. The coverage wasn't just about the specific exchange, it was about what it represented. Political analysts were calling it a generational shift, a moment when the old guard's assumptions about who deserves respect and who can be dismissed were completely shattered. Rachel Maddow devoted an entire segment to breaking down Roumie's strategy. This wasn't just a good comeback. This was a lawyer setting a trap, letting her opponent walk into it, and then systematically dismantling their credibility using their own words against them. Chuck Todd on Meet the Press called it one of the most effective pieces of political theater we've seen in years. Made even more powerful by the fact that it wasn't theater at all. It was genuine expertise meeting false authority. Senator Pence's response to his humiliation was swift but ineffective. His office released a statement within hours. Senator Pence stands by his constitutional analysis and notes that experience comes in many forms beyond just specific case numbers. But the damage was done. The statement only made things worse by seeming to double down on the very credentialism that Roumie had just exposed as hollow. Political observers noted that Pence's usual post-hearing media appearances were canceled, and his staff was refusing to book interviews about the exchange. Pence did attempt one appearance on a friendly Indiana radio show, where he tried to downplay what happened. Well, that young man certainly had his talking points prepared, but talking points don't change constitutional law. The response backfired spectacularly. Talking points became the new viral phrase, with legal experts pointing out that Roumie hadn't been reading talking points. He had been citing his actual case record from memory. For Democrats, Jonathan Roumie's performance was like finding a political unicorn. Here was someone who could go toe-to-toe with the Republicans' best debaters and not just survive, but dominate. Party leadership took notice immediately. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries' statement was telling. Representative Roumie demonstrated exactly the kind of expertise and backbone we need in Congress. When Republicans try to dismiss our voices, they better come prepared for a real fight. Progressive fundraising groups reported massive spikes in donations with Roumie's name attached. Small dollar donations poured in from across the country with notes like, "Thank you for standing up to bullies." And finally, someone who fights back effectively. AOC tweeted what many were thinking. "This is how you handle condescending men in positions of power." Take notes, everyone. The Republican response was notably muted, which spoke volumes about how devastating Pence's loss had been. When one of your star performers gets completely outclassed, the usual response is to circle the wagons and defend them. Instead, most Republicans simply avoided commenting on the exchange altogether. Some conservative commentators tried to spin it as Democratic grandstanding, but their hearts weren't in it. When someone gets destroyed as thoroughly as Pence had been, it's hard to pretend otherwise. One unnamed Republican senator was quoted as saying, "Mike's usually sharper than that. I think he underestimated him and paid the price." The more thoughtful conservative analysis focused on the strategic error. Pence violated the first rule of political combat: never underestimate your opponent. He assumed he could intimidate a freshman congressman and instead got schooled by someone who was better prepared and more experienced in the specific area under discussion. The legal profession's response was overwhelmingly positive for Roumie. Law professors used the exchange as a teaching moment about the difference between general legal knowledge and specialized expertise. A Harvard law professor tweeted, "Perfect example of why specific experience matters more than general credentials. Roumie knew the law because he's lived it." The National Bar Association, which represents minority lawyers, issued a statement praising Roumie for demonstrating the expertise and preparation that characterizes excellence in legal advocacy. Several legal blogs noted that Roumie's approach, letting Pence establish his own standards and then systematically showing how he exceeded them, was straight out of the courtroom advocacy playbook. Political observers noted that Roumie's performance would likely change how certain senators and representatives approach committee hearings. The old model of intimidating junior members with seniority and credentials had just been shown to be ineffective against someone properly prepared. A longtime Capitol Hill reporter observed, "This is going to make everyone think twice before they try to dismiss someone based on their freshman status." Roumie just showed that underestimating your opponent can backfire spectacularly. Committee chairs were reportedly already discussing the need to better prepare their witnesses for encounters with knowledgeable members from the opposing party. Beyond politics, the exchange resonated with millions of Americans who had experienced similar moments of being underestimated or dismissed by people in positions of authority. The comment sections were filled with stories of workplace encounters, academic situations, and professional settings where someone had used credentials to try to silence someone else's expertise. A viral Twitter thread from a young Black attorney perfectly captured the moment. "Every Black woman in corporate America just stood up and cheered. We've all been in meetings where someone tried to Pence us. Jonathan just showed us how to respond." Political strategists were already analyzing the long-term implications of Roumie's star-making moment. For Democrats, he represented a new model of how to effectively challenge Republican authority without seeming disrespectful or unprofessional. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He just systematically demonstrated that he knew more about the topic than Pence did, noted a Democratic strategist. That's a template that other members can follow. For Republicans, the exchange served as a warning about the dangers of overconfidence and the importance of actually knowing your opponent before you engage them in political combat. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on Mike Pence himself. For years, he had been one of the Republicans' most effective performers in committee hearings. His ability to make opponents look foolish had made him a valuable asset. But credibility, once lost, is hard to regain. Pence's future appearances would inevitably be viewed through the lens of the Roumie exchange. His signature move, using folksy charm to set up devastating questions, had been turned against him so effectively that it might never work the same way again. Several senators privately confided that the Pence-Roumie exchange had fundamentally changed how they approached committee preparation. One Democratic aide revealed that opposing committees were now researching every committee member's background thoroughly before hearings, afraid of walking into similar traps. Political observers noted that Pence seemed less aggressive in subsequent hearings, more careful about his targets, and more respectful of his opponent's potential expertise. What Jonathan Roumie accomplished in that hearing room went beyond just embarrassing Mike Pence. He established a new standard for how prepared you need to be if you're going to challenge someone in congressional hearings. Gone were the days when seniority and general credentials were enough to intimidate opponents. Roumie had shown that specific expertise, careful preparation, and strategic thinking could overcome any advantage in age, experience, or educational pedigree. By the end of that week, Jonathan Roumie had gone from a freshman congressman, known mainly in California political circles, to a national figure with over 1 million new social media followers and invitations to appear on every major political show. But perhaps the most telling indicator of his new status came from an unexpected source. Future witnesses appearing before congressional committees started doing much more homework on the members who would be questioning them. The Roumie Effect had made everyone realize that underestimating your opponents was no longer an option. The exchange between Jonathan, Roumie, and Mike Pence became a case study in political communication, legal advocacy, and the power of preparation over presumption. It showed that in the modern political era, respect has to be earned through competence, not inherited through seniority. Political science programs across the country began using the footage as a teaching tool for effective legislative strategy. Law schools incorporated it into courses on courtroom advocacy and cross-examination techniques. The moment became required viewing for anyone studying how to handle hostile questioning or condescending opponents in professional settings. For millions of Americans watching, it was a perfect moment of justice. Seeing someone who had been dismissed and underestimated turn the tables completely using nothing but facts, preparation, and strategic brilliance. And for anyone who has ever been told they don't belong in a room because of their age, race, gender, or background, Jonathan Roumie's takedown of Mike Pence proved that competence and preparation can overcome any prejudice. The message was clear. Don't try to intimidate someone unless you're absolutely sure you know more than they do. Because if you're wrong, you might just create their star-making moment while destroying your own credibility in the process. If you enjoyed watching Jonathan Roumie's masterful takedown of Mike Pence, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Political moments like this don't happen every day, but when they do, we'll break them down for you with all the details, context, and analysis you need to understand what really happened. Comment below and let us know what was your favorite moment from this incredible exchange. Do you think this changes how politicians will approach committee hearings going forward? And who do you think might be the next veteran politician to underestimate a rising star? Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to see what happens when preparation meets presumption.